Hi everyone, so today I am teaching you how to paint these loose poppies and adding in a simple background wash. Let's get to it. All right, so I have my 100% watercolor paper here, but use what you have, and I'm also using a mop brush today. The mop brush holds so much water and it's a large brush, so it's gonna give us a really nice loose look. One of the biggest issues that I find with a brush like this is that since there's so much water going into it, sometimes you run the risk of pooling. And so a little tip is just make sure you have a paper towel or something handy so that you can dab your brush after dipping in water, and then you won't have so much on your page. So I've added in some darker pink over that first light wash, and I'm gonna take some paper towel. We're just gonna start dabbing some marks in here. I just wanna have a nice little kind of splotchy look for this. We'll do some details over the top as well, but I think it's fun just to play around with paper towel and see what kind of marks you can make. So now I have some bright orange on my brush with a lot of water. We're gonna do the same type of shape. It's kind of a triangular shape, I guess, and just blot that on there, add in some more of that darker paint as well. And or mottled, that is the one word I was looking for. When we're dabbing with paper towel, we're creating a mottled look. And so we'll do that with this one as well. Might be a little bit harder to see because it is a very light color, but we're just gonna try just a little bit. There we go. A little bit of scrubbing and just having fun with this. I love to use, I don't do it as much in my videos as I want to, but I love using random things to make fun marks, not just using brushes all the time. All right, I've used my dagger here. I'm going to make my stems curving just a little bit, and this one just peeking up at the top and then coming down. Let's see, what direction shall I go? Let's just do it like this. So I'm using a dagger because it does have that fine point, but you can use a really thin brush if you wanted number 2, number 4, or anything that has a nice point to it. Now, poppy leaves are very thin here and just have these little squiggly things popping out. And so I know that sounds really scientific, but we're just gonna make these little lines here. And recently I have a video that actually, one of my shorts, it was a poppy, a bright pink poppy, and someone was like, this does not look like poppy leaves in the least. And they're right, because the leaves that I did were not poppy leaves at all. And I said, you know, that's the beauty of art. You can do whatever you want. And so, but let's be accurate today for that reason. And it's true, it's good to be accurate, especially if people are wanting to learn how things are. So when I look at poppy leaves, this is kind of that impression that I get in my head of what I've seen. And we're just gonna kind of put our artistic spin on it today. So the tip of this brush, it's not as thin as if you were to use a liner, which you could use a liner brush. That would work quite nicely. But for today, my dagger brush is my go-to brush. As you guys probably know in my videos, I use it all the time. It is from Christy the Painter, Christy Rice. If you want to check it out, I will link that in the description below. It comes in a nice set of 6 brushes, including the liner brush that I use on this channel all the time. And let's do just a little bit of a poppy bud here. A nice oval shape will do it. And there you have it. And now let's go ahead, get a little bit more green on our palette, just a little bit darker. Of course, every time I add more saturated paint, I always feel the need to add more water, but just depending on what you're trying to do. Here though, I want it to be really dark, and we're going to start adding in, darkening up our greens as it's dried a little bit, and adding in that base of this side-facing flower. Yes, this one will be side-facing. Now I'm gonna grab my lighter brush if I can get it, and we'll dip into this nice saturated pink paint, and we're gonna do some lines. This is why it's called a lighter brush, people. It does a fantastic job. So it's dipping into the green, and the pink is gonna spread into the green. That's okay. Let it do its thing. It's all good. So as you can see, I'm trying to curve around. My lines are a little bit straighter right at that mid point of the flower. But as I'm starting to go out towards the ends, I'm curving kind of up and around so that we can create the visual that this flower is curving as well. It's a cup shape, and we're trying to put those lines to make it look really delicate and fancy, but also show that curve. And so you can make your lines darker. If you want to, you can make them lighter. I'm going to go ahead and do the center of my second poppy. This is going to be a side-facing poppy. And so we're going to do the green part here first. And we're just going to do a half circle basically on this one. Pretty dark saturated paint that I'm using here. Make your half circle. And then we're going to take our liner and we're just going to make sure it's wet enough and clean enough because it might have had other paint on it, the pink probably. And we're just going to pull out that color. Every time I do this, I always think of like a bug, and I also think of like a big eyelash. It's kind of funny. So we'll do that and just spreading that paint around, and it is bleeding a little bit, and that's okay. We'll come back and do some darker lines later on too. So now I'm going to mix up some darker orange, and I'm going to darken up those really small looking petals that are right in front of the center of our poppy. What we're wanting to do is to show that these petals, they look short, they look small because of the perspective of the poppy. I'm going to add in some darker orange as well on the sides. And we're just going to play around with this a little bit too. What we want to do is we want to darken up the whole flower, but we also want to show that the part in front would be the petals that are in front of that center. And I'm just taking off some of the paint on the sides just to kind of separate those two. And because of the perspective of the flower, those petals in front, of course, you're just gonna see a little piece of them. All right, we can darken up our stems. I darkened up the little bud as well. And I'm not gonna go over every single little leafy part here, but I just wanna take the tip of my liner brush, sorry, my dagger brush, not a liner. I could use a liner here, and you could do that for your leaves. It would give you a really nice thin look, but I think that these thicker ones work as well. And so I'm just darkening up some of them and not going over the entire leaf either, just leaving some of that first wash of color, which is a really light green. And I'm just blending with a clean brush some of this pink here. There might be a little bit of green that comes out, that's okay. Just make it nice and loose. All right, I've allowed it to dry now, and we're gonna do a little bit more of our orange. As you can see, it's all dried about the same color. And guys, as you've seen, sometimes we do things a few times. We figure out what layers we need to add, what we need to subtract. We can't always subtract much. We can lift color with our clean, damp paintbrush, but we can't lift everything up, and we certainly can't paint over everything. But this is why I always go light, so we can continue to add in some darker as we see fit. And I think that looks like about what I was going for, so that's good. So now I have some black on my brush, and I'm going over where I had put those green lines before. We're gonna add a little bit more layers by adding those classic dark poppy lines that you see in those flowers. Just adding that in, darkening it up a little bit. The liner is really fun to use. I'm not doing straight lines. Again, I'm curving them kind of out and in as well, just to create that shape. Now a little bit of green. I think I want to darken up. I'm going to stipple here, so those tiny little dots around that center. Just adding that in and seeing how that turns out. It's so funny with poppies too. I tend to have a hard time with them sometimes because in my head I have an idea of what I want them to look like, and they always turn out different, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I definitely did a couple other compositions earlier today to practice and see which I liked best. And now I'm just taking the paper towel and lifting some of that paint. I like to use paper towel as much as I can. So we have some of that green on there, but then we have a little bit of splotchiness, and now we're gonna do our background. So some people will wet their page first. What I do is I just take a really watery mix of paint. This is a very light blue color with my mop brush, guys, and it's so easy. I'm just simply adding in that wash of color, being really careful not to scrub my page, knowing that although my flowers are dry, and maybe there might be some parts like where the bud is, where they're a little wet, that's okay. Where they are dry, I'm going to, if I scrub over them a couple times, 2 or 3 times, that paint is going to start lifting and bleeding into the background, which isn't a bad thing, but if you want it to stay put, you can do that. Just lightly brush once or maybe even twice over the dry part and you'll be good to go. See, there's a little spreading here with the bud, and I'm okay with that. I like that look. Now I'm going to add a little bit more darker purple to this blue and just splotch that around my background. And that's it. Doing a background is pretty simple. You can go really dark if you want. You can do multiple colors if you want, like I'm doing here. And when it dries, it will be a lot lighter, but I wanted to go light because my poppies are so bright. And I don't want to kind of have them fight, the colors fight each other, but rather complement each other. And so it could be a blue like the background of the sky. And it's a very simple thing to add in, and it adds a lot of pop of color. And some people like to paint in backgrounds all the time. I typically will leave my background white, but it's fun to experiment and see kind of how it changes your composition. All right, once everything is dry, as it is now, I've had a lot of layers in this, a lot of drying time. One last thing is I'm just gonna take a little bit of black and stipple that in. And then we will be pretty much done with this painting. Curious what your thoughts are. If you like adding in backgrounds or if you don't like adding in backgrounds, let me know in the comments. Also, if you're interested in supporting me on Patreon or seeing bonus content, the link is in the description. Thank you guys for being here. See you next time.